Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. My name is David Lump. I am Dean of the College of Arts and Letters, and it is my privilege to welcome you to this 14th Poehler Lecture, the explicit purpose of which is to connect the Christian faith with one's academic inquiry and one's teaching. Indeed, near the turn of the 21st century, several visionary faculty members conceived the idea for a lecture series that explored the various ways senior faculty members from across the disciplinary spectrum brought together their teaching, their research in their disciplines, and their Christian faith. The mission statement of the university asserts that our individual and collective preparation of students for thoughtful and informed living, for dedicated service to God and humanity, and for the enlightened care of God's creation is all intended to take place within the context of the Christian gospel. To that end, this lecture was established, thanks in no small measure to the generosity of Robert and Elizabeth Trembath, Mr. and Mrs. Ted Trembath, and Mr. and Mrs. Rob Trembath, in honor of the Reverend Dr. Willie August Poehler, Elizabeth's father, and president of Concordia for nearly a quarter century. 14 lectures later, all of us here this evening continue to enjoy this annual event conceived by those colleagues with the great help of this family. In gratitude for their foresight, I invite you to join me in beginning this 14th Poehler Lecture with prayer. Triune God, you are the author of life and the giver of every good gift. Above all, you give us forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation through him who is the Word made flesh, your Son, Jesus Christ. This Jesus identified the great and first commandment as loving the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, and mind. That is, with the totality of who we are as your redeemed sons and daughters. At this university, we endeavor to connect the life of the mind with the love of God in Jesus Christ, and with service to the neighbor whom God places before us. In that spirit, we give thanks for all of your gifts to us, and we pray that this lecture nourish not only our minds, but our hearts and souls as well. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. It is now my distinct privilege to introduce very briefly our distinguished speaker for this evening. Professor Paul Hillmer is a proud graduate of what was then Concordia College, St. Paul. He has worked his way up through the ranks to become one of Concordia's most publicly visible and distinguished faculty members. Following his undergraduate education at Concordia, Paul received his master's and doctoral degrees from the University of Minnesota, both in United States history. The work for which he is perhaps best known to the community outside of Concordia is his acclaimed book, A People's History of the Hmong. His students over many years have come to know him as a splendid classroom teacher and an accessible mentor. His colleagues know him as one whose office door is invariably open and whose counsel will be candid, intelligent, and constructive. I know him as a friend and colleague to whom I can go when I need honest feedback, or when we as a college or university need something done thoroughly, promptly, and at an exceptionally high level. When he is not on Concordia's campus generously sharing his gifts with all of us, he can probably be found on his lake with Janet or in section 103 of Target Field. They're great seats, by the way. Or else buried in an archive somewhere, pursuing his latest historical adventure, of which all of us will soon be the grateful beneficiaries. This evening, I am honored to present Dr. Paul Hillmer.
Very kind and undeserved, thank you. Certainly no one ever got an introduction as undeserved as that one. Thank you, David. And thank you all for being here on this windy, cold, somewhat disappointing, but then again, could be worse, March sort of early winter evening. Let me give you one piece of warning before we begin. Last week, I suffered a sort of self-inflicted injury, and this morning that injury turned into muscle spasms in my lower abdomen on my left side, which, as it turns out, is somewhat uncomfortable, but even more so makes you make noises that do not complement the kind of remarks that I had prepared for this evening. Fortunately, I think we have that under control, and if not, well, we'll all find out together, won't we? Well, I've written a long speech, so I'd better get started. I came to Concordia as a freshman in the fall of 1979. Yes, freshman, that means the Stone Age. Here I am the following spring. I remember hair. Now, change and decay and all around I see isn't just a line from a hymn, it's my daily experience in front of the mirror. I so enjoyed my time at Concordia that I dreamed of being a college professor one day. When it happened, at my alma mater no less, I was thrilled. Suddenly, people who were my role models became my mentors, even my colleagues, my friends. Things were different back then. I remember when we called ourselves a Christian liberal arts college, but times change, and I have done my best to change with them. At 54 years old, what now seems like such a tender age, I am confronted with the cold Mesozoic reality. I am a dinosaur. A hurtling asteroid has already radically changed my environment, and the only question I now face is, how long will I survive? Or perhaps that metaphor is too stark. I am William Carnegie, father of the boy who will become the richest man in the world. I've spent my life working my hand-operated loom, but an almost inconceivable technological revolution has turned my world upside down, threatening what I do and who I am. If these metaphors don't work for you, let's try this. I am a historian whose vocation is not to provide neat and tidy answers to complex questions, but to identify various discrete components of the past and consider if all aspects have been properly identified, considered, and contextualized. Because there is usually a dominant historical narrative written not so much by those who are most correct as by those who are the most powerful, I tend to look for underreported narratives written by underdogs and losers. I provoke people to reconsider their inherent narrative and include as well as respect other points of view. In the context of this lecture series, think of it this way. History encourages me to love my neighbor as myself. Finally, I am a poor, miserable sinner who every day, despite my best efforts, commits evil and fails to do good, sometimes spectacularly so. But thanks be to God, I am not judged, at least by my Creator, on my own merit, but rather on the merits of the one who has kept the law, yet received the full weight of the punishment I deserve. The title of my address this evening is Destroying Education to Save It. You might wonder exactly what I mean. So do I. Quantum theory suggests that all future possibilities are actually real, each one occupying its own space in its own universe. Yet even now, each of us occupies a self-made perceptual universe more real to us than actual reality. While I can only comment on the past in my own plane of existence, the future is unwritten, and many possibilities await us. There is no doubt that education, particularly higher education, is changing at a dizzying pace. The question is, where is all this change taking us? Certainly, it is taking us to a place where education will look even less like that of my youth than it already does. In order to keep pace with economic, social, technological, generational, and other changes, education as we have known it for centuries will likely be destroyed in order to be saved. But to what kind of destruction am I referring? Simply put, I have no idea. This, by the way, is an answer we should all provide more often. We far too frequently offer or are asked to offer an opinion about something for which we have nowhere near enough information to even consider having an opinion. But we offer one anyway. Here endeth the first digression. Will education be destroyed like the caterpillar is destroyed to create the butterfly? Will a slow, earthbound, limited form of education be replaced by a transcendent, boundless education that helps its students take metaphorical, if not actual, flight? Or might it be more like what economist Joseph Schumpeter called creative destruction? In an era when education has become more and more commoditized, will the free market's rather messy way of delivering progress define our path of change? Or might education's destruction be reminiscent of the great management-labor conflicts of decades past, such as when Will Carnegie's grown-up son Andrew articulated the rights of labor, went fishing in Scotland, and had his partner Henry Clay Frick bust the union in Homestead, Pennsylvania, precipitating violence and retribution that poisoned the steel industry for decades. Will we see broader conflicts in higher education, such as those seen recently at Gustavus Adolphus College or the Minsky system? Or what about a dystopian metaphor which inspired the title for this evening's lecture? Titles, by the way, should be provocative. On February 7th, 1968, American forces obliterated much of the South Vietnamese village of Ben Tre. When reporter Peter Arnett asked about the incident, an Army major allegedly replied, "It became necessary to destroy the village to save it." In their efforts to remain viable in the face of massive change, will our institutions of higher learning so poorly embody a university education that we will wonder if they were worth saving? One of the key components in managing change and preparing for the future is leadership. And let me be clear, I am neither a leader at my university nor privy to the conversations in which this change is forecasted or managed. My comments, therefore, are from a broad perspective and not meant to address specific things about which I know very little. For further reference, please refer back to digression number 1. Much of the change we are currently experiencing is fueled not only by educational and technological forces, but others far beyond our ken or control. The advent of for-profit entities, despite their often low graduation and high loan default rates, and our government's one-size-fits-all response, particularly in the area of financial aid, has complicated our task considerably. As the pool of potential undergraduates has diminished, imperatives of financial stability, even survival, have unleashed a sobering reality with which boards of regents and executive administrators have long contended, while faculty and staff have been, if not oblivious, certainly insulated. Then there are the crises of our own making. For years, we deferred the growing issue of affordability, while politicians and planners ignored the reductions of support for education and the middle class. Our church body never envisioned the need for an endowment for its colleges until it faced significant decline. The situation in which we now find ourselves is placing and will continue to place pressures on the quality and even the fundamental definition of higher education. I accept the doctrine of original sin as an axiom. All human beings, especially this bald, gray-bearded model, desire to put self above all else. Marianne Evans, aka George Eliot, put it more colorfully. We are all of us born in moral stupidity, taking the world as an udder to feed our supreme selves. In an environment of swift and uncertain change, people tend to place themselves or be placed in certain camps and spend as much time as necessary entrenching their own opinions and vilifying those of their rivals to ensure their own peace of mind and sense of superiority. And in this kind of unpleasant contest, the key element is power. In a university, one might argue, knowledge is power. Socrates and Plato argued that an idea is the most powerful, the most real thing in the universe. But historians tend to agree with George Orwell. Who controls the present controls the past. Who controls the past controls the future. History, or more generally, information, does not speak for itself. Rather, it is shaped by human beings into a narrative that may be instructive or may be manipulative. 21st century American Christians, often to our detriment, not only ignore these realities, but make matters worse by employing a kind of pseudo-spiritual reductive deduction. I want something, I pray for something, I get that something. Therefore, God wants me to have that something. Those adversely affected by my having it should accept their role in the divine plan. People who disagree with me are not only against me, they are against God. It's doubtful we actually believe this, but it is often how we behave. Now, you might rightly say, look here, materialism is hardly uniquely American. True. But Roland Delattre suggests that starting with Jonathan Edwards and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and continuing all the way to Jim and Tammy Faye Baker and Joel Osteen, Americans have suffered from what he called supply-side spirituality. The belief that material abundance, rather than scarcity, is the inherent nature and destiny of every true American. All too often, we believe we are meant to have our way. One of the great American Christian minds of the 20th century, Reinhold Niebuhr, would want to slap us back into reality. By the way, I have always wanted to study how American society went from upholding people like Niebuhr as spokesmen for Christianity in the public arena to, by the 1980s, making the go-to guy none other than Jerry Falwell. Here endeth digression number 2. In Moral Man and Immoral Society, Niebuhr writes, "The Christian faith ought to persuade us that political controversies are always conflicts between sinners and not between righteous men and sinners. It ought to mitigate the self-righteousness, which is an inevitable concomitant of all human conflict. The will to live," concludes Niebuhr, "becomes the will to power." As different interests contend with change, it is easy for individuals, and especially, Niebuhr would argue, groups with a common interest, to become Machiavellian. After all, in a contest between the two, most people would rather win than be right. The winner, after all, controls the discourse and proclaims he is right, even if he isn't. The proliferation of partisan news and shrill talk radio spreading like gangrene across our own media landscape demonstrates this painful truth. Even Jesus' disciples couldn't control themselves. After witnessing his death and resurrection, after sitting at his feet for 40 days as he prepared them for what we now call Pentecost, they asked a completely self-interested, political question. Lord, are you now going to restore the kingdom to Israel? These impulses, as natural as they are both anti-Christian and anti-higher education. Now, lest I be misunderstood, I am not saying that powerful people are bad and powerless people are good, but rather proposing a corollary to 1 Timothy 6:10. The love of power is the root of all kinds of evil. As such, it is often the case that those who seek power the most, especially power that privileges one interest over another, should be trusted with it the least. The reason I've spent so much time talking about power and the problems associated with it is that colleges and universities have moved from an era of partnership in decision-making to one of increasing centralization. This transition may indeed be necessitated for a number of the reasons already enumerated, but in the midst of dizzying change, that power must be wielded judiciously. By what yardstick might it be assessed? Using both Christianity and history as a gauge, one question is most instructive. Is there a cost to telling truth to power? Is the practice encouraged in the spirit of Christian humility, as well as the understanding that multiple perspectives are key to the decision-making process? Or is it discouraged or even punished? This question is the same whether I am the power in the scenario, the peer, or the peon. And the issue is so old and so pervasive that it is one of the many reasons that faculty seek tenure. Since historians examine minority opinions, and since I now hold a minority opinion, I'd like to ruminate on the nature of higher education in my own shrinking universe. A ship is safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are for. A university is safe following the latest trends and popular expectations, but that is not what universities are for. Yes, one must be realistic. Only obscenely well-endowed schools have the luxury of even considering such a credo. But since we're in my universe and someone made the mistake of giving me a microphone and a lectern, we're going to reside here for a few minutes. High schools are already spending more time on math, science, and career skills. Governors in Florida, Texas, and North Carolina say they will refuse to spend taxpayer money on students majoring in the humanities. Virginia law now requires all institutions to list their majors and the starting salary each of its graduates can expect. These and numerous other forces suggest that higher education must focus more and more on career preparation. Yet here are a few problems to consider. First, many freshmen come to school undecided. Most recent statistics indicate that 50 to 70% of them change their majors at least once, most at least 3 times before they graduate. So going through a fast-tracked, more career-based program won't work for some. Second, a copious scan of various university career counseling sites reveals a common theme. This generation will not just be changing jobs, but careers on several occasions during the course of their lives. By spending time on a single area, are we really giving our students the best preparation for their future? Some students prepare for a job they end up abandoning. For example, the Minnesota Department of Education reports this state loses 1/3 of its new teachers within their first 5 years. Across the board, people often see their jobs simply as essential but unpleasant means to an end. A 2013 Conference Board survey reveals less than 50% of American workers were happy in their job. Then there's the current state of our public discourse. Some of us remember the days when newsmen were the most trusted people in America. Today, we primarily have 2 types of mainstream media: divisive and banal. The former encourages us to hunker down in our own intellectual bunkers, hearing only what strokes our own egos and rationalizes our biases. It primarily provides scapegoats for, rather than careful analysis of, the pressing problems of the day. The latter features the cute, the gossipy, the violent, the disastrous, the sybaritic, and the eye-catching, often served with a heaping helping of hysteria. Political coverage more akin to stenography than journalism. And my favorite, invitations for mutually ignorant people to weigh in with their opinions. As if news programs can't afford to alienate a single viewer or sponsor. These days, the news is influenced as much by advertising revenue as sitcoms and reality shows. Money used to tell us what to buy, how to vote, or what to think has become all but synonymous with power. Deciding what the media say and don't say, driving to an ever greater degree the most important decisions in healthcare, bathing our every experience in product placement, and surveilling our every real and digital movement to better identify our buying habits. And most disturbingly, with the help of our openly partisan Supreme Court, polluting our political process with unlimited sums of money from special interests, masquerading as social welfare organizations. Money, often in this context better described as lucre, not only controls or not only equals power, it equals free speech. As Mark Leibovich has opined in his illuminating but depressing This Town, our so-called public servants are now a permanent feudal class of insiders who never leave Washington and are happy to enhance their personal welfare at the expense of representative government and the common good. D.C. is now the wealthiest city in the nation, home to 7 of the country's 10 wealthiest counties. Political Washington, he writes, is an inbred company town where party differences are easily subsumed by a desire to gain wealthy corporate patrons to help with re-election, and through which one can find a cushy corporate job in retirement. Cowardice, concludes Leibovich, is rewarded every step of the way. In short, linking information and politics to commerce has contributed mightily to the debasement of public discourse. What do Christians have to say on these important public issues? We are mostly silent. Perhaps it's because we would rather win than be right on our issues of choice. Should we be so shocked, then, that millennials have less and less interest in the church, the news, and the political process? A little more than 100 years ago, John Alexander Smith wrote, "Nothing that you will learn in the course of your studies will be of the slightest possible use to you, save only this, that if you work hard and intelligently, you should be able to detect when a man is talking rot. And that, in my view, is the main, if not the sole, purpose of education." Hyperbole aside, in a society where power, expressed primarily through money and repetition, are destroying our ability, even our desire, to think critically, deeply, and compassionately about anything, this purpose seems every bit as essential in the age of the internet as it did in the age of the fountain pen. What is higher education's role in addressing these pressing social, intellectual, and spiritual problems? In my shrinking universe, no one answers spending more time on job preparation, or if only we could find a way to make the liberal arts relevant. It's understood that in the body of education, the body politic, the body of society itself, the liberal arts are the connective tissue that holds everything together and helps everything make sense. In my universe, any message, any text is only as important as its context, its subtext, and often its pretext. Words are only understood properly when I know who says them and for what purpose. When I listen to thoughtful, critical responses, and when I have a sense of whether the narrative is even really starting in the right place to create the greatest opportunity for objective understanding. In my universe, much is ineffable, which is why I lean so heavily and so happily on art, music, literature, and drama in all of its rich forms. It's why after a worship service, a meaningful song often sticks in the heart and mind longer than a good sermon. But you needn't take the word of a dinosaur. When the American Academy of Arts and Sciences assembled a 54-person commission in 2013 to contemplate the future of the humanities and social sciences, passionate advocates arose from perhaps unexpected places. The CEO of Boeing said high-tech manufacturing requires skilled engineers, but they wouldn't advance without a broader array of skills, especially communication and interacting with culturally diverse others. According to General and Ambassador Carl Eikenberry, weapons can only protect national security so far. Equally essential are the understanding of foreign languages, foreign histories and cultures, and different beliefs and ethical systems. The longtime head of Lockheed Martin, described as the father of STEM, stated that collecting evidence, weighing interpretations, and making arguments, core skills for creative workers and good citizens, require broad training across the arts and sciences. America's single greatest educational deficit, he said, is in history. I'll be sure to send him a thank you note. Even so, we live in a culture that has commoditized pretty much everything, including religion. During an earlier period of my career, I read a number of histories studying the development of American Christianity with a critical eye. There are those who might ignore or even scorn their views, but I have never understood that impulse. It is a curious but common phenomenon to find Christians within their own circle of faith freely admitting their sins and failings while suddenly becoming perfect when attacked from the outside. As a result, we often miss out on valuable opportunities to gain wisdom and insight and engage in constructive dialogue. Leaders in the Catholic Church are learning a very hard and very expensive lesson on treating the institution of the Church as if it were as unassailable as God. So here is just one example of a critic who has something useful to say, both to the Church and to those of us who teach. In Selling God, R. Lawrence Moore asserts that from the beginning, American religious leaders participated in a process through which religion's initial role in the marketplace, its acting as an independent influence, gave way to its second role, cooperation in making itself a competitive item for sale. This was inevitable, he argues, since the Church can only remain culturally central insofar as it learns to work with other things that are central. Clergymen in the colonial period, for example, often wrote their own versions of sensational, even lurid stories popular at the time, justifying their methods by concluding with a moral lesson. But that's not why people read their stories. Owing to the First Amendment and numerous state laws denying churches state funding, ministers strove to fill seats and maintain their status as influencers and arbiters of high culture. Churches influenced many positive social changes, such as improvements in a wide variety of public environments, but their desire for popularity and prosperity, as well as new forms of entertainments in saloons, parks, theaters, camps, sporting arenas, and vaudeville shows, and new technologies like the Nickelodeon, cinema, phonograph, radio, and television, led them to one compromise after another. Christians were often active participants in, rather than passive victims of, this transformation, since in Moore's view, religion must either keep up with other cultural aspects of national life including the commercial forms, or it has no importance. Did church leaders set out to create a market system of competing denominations, or to become deeply implicated in a commercial means of tapping popular sentiment that made the church captive to popular tastes and norms? Even Moore says no. Nonetheless, they did. Are all of Moore's arguments and presuppositions unassailable? Of course not. Is there far more than a grain of truth in his observations, and more than enough cause for the church to think both seriously and penitentially about them? Most certainly. Until the last 30 years or so, higher education was largely insulated from the commercializing effects of our culture. There were enough students to go around, a broad consensus about the value of a college degree, and no great need to spend large amounts of money on advertising. The best hope middle-class parents had for making their children's lives better than their own was investing in higher education. But then came, among other things, trickle-down economics, the 24-hour news cycle, NAFTA, a lowering birth rate, wage stagnation, and the Great Recession. Since middle-class incomes didn't keep pace with the cost of higher education, parents began fearing for their children's post-graduation job prospects. In that context, the process of commoditizing higher education has kicked in with a vengeance. The dominant narrative, making college pay, immediately, overtly, and primarily professionally, is coinciding with protean changes in information and communications technology that have accelerated our expectations that everything should be easy, free, and immediate, but also made available massive amounts of information once the exclusive domain of professionals like doctors, lawyers, and, yes, college professors. In this environment, education seems marketed more as a private asset than as a public good. Particularly for its fastest growing segment, online degree completion and graduate programs, often marketed to working adults, convenience is the key component in selling the product, and understandably so. For example, the advertisement for Lindenwood College's accelerated degree program reads, "Get your degree, keep your life." A great slogan, perhaps carrying an unintended message. Education should be easy. No sacrifices should be required. We can't ask too much of you. In this environment, students often see themselves as customers. And as the old saying goes, the customer is always right. This too can blur the line between education and commerce, between a teaching relationship and a transactional one. In this environment, the erosion or even the eradication of classes and subject areas without an obvious vocational link can be seen as a necessity. Many schools are cutting pieces out of what for many, many years has been considered a seamless cloth. And the first thing deemed expendable, or at least reducible, are the humanities. Like it or not, this is what the marketplace is demanding. After all, as Larry Moore suggests, those who wish to remain competitive, perhaps even those who wish to survive, must keep up with other cultural aspects of national life, including the commercial forms, or they have no importance. As a result, tensions between educational and market imperatives are likely to only increase. Now, given the amount of time I've spent questioning some of the assumptions of the contemporary higher education marketplace, you might justifiably think, this speech is positively Shakespearean. A tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I'm not saying that the world or even the university would be better if everyone studied more history. I'm thinking it, but I'm not saying it. Yes, students certainly need to be prepared for life in the modern world, with all of its scientific, mathematical, technological, commercial, ethical, and other challenges. And certainly, we must do all within reason to help students graduate with as little debt as possible. Yes, career preparation is critical. But these ideas aren't getting equal time tonight because they don't need it. They are everywhere. Nothing that is truly of benefit to our students is objectionable. But shouldn't we think about both the long term and the short term? About how students will make a living and have a life? Since World War II, one of American higher education's marks of greatness is that it has boldly proclaimed that a broadly based, intellectually challenging education that creates thoughtful, informed, active citizens is not meant for elites only, but for anyone who wants it. What concerns me about its current direction is that it seems to imply that was a mistake. So what is the future of higher education in this country? If I knew, I'd be on my private jet flying to another high-priced consultation. My task is to examine underreported aspects of the past, including the recent past, that may help us illuminate our experience. Tonight's comments do not come from a fear that higher education is doomed or its leadership ill-informed. What all this means and where it will all lead will be decided by people not only more powerful, but more broadly aware than I. But I hope they won't mind people outside the circle expressing legitimate concerns or respectfully testing an assumption or two. So what is the best environment in which these changes might occur, at least at universities wishing to uphold Christian teaching? At first blush, my answer will seem so simplistic and silly that you'll probably wonder if I flew to a Colorado head shop and smoked my way through a ganja buffet. Let's talk about love. 1 Corinthians 13, to be precise. And in my final digression of the night, let me simply say this chapter is the most egregiously misappropriated biblical wisdom in the history of American Christendom. As you must know, nowhere in this chapter is there any indication that St. Paul's observations are meant for married couples. So when he says, love is patient, kind, not boastful or proud, not self-seeking, easily angered, or willing to dishonor others, and incapable of keeping a record of wrongs, he isn't showing us how to treat those we already love better. He's speaking to and about all of us. For our purposes, he might say, if I get A's in all of my classes, but don't have love, I am fingernails on a chalkboard. If I get the best teaching evaluations of all time and execute more scholarship than all of my colleagues combined and don't have love, I am the longest, most boring meeting ever. If I enhance the prestige and guarantee the financial security of my university, but have not love, I'm nothing. Since love is such an abused, multi-purpose word in our language, we might consider using the word respect, or resisting the urge to turn people or their ideas into abstractions or obstacles. Immanuel Kant said it well. People should not be treated merely as a means to other people's ends. Perhaps we could manage to view 1 Corinthians 13 in a Christocentric rather than an egocentric way. The former understands, this is who Christ calls me to be. The latter insists, this is how others should be treating me. Perhaps we could transcend the binary tendencies so deeply ingrained in our culture. Black or white, right or wrong, Republican or Democrat, tastes great or less filling. Perhaps we need not commit to always being swift and efficient or slow and deliberate, emphasizing the institution or the individual, or looking more like a corporation or a community. And at all times, I must start any conversation I have with anyone, no matter how contentious it may be or how right I think I am, with a clear sense of my own flawed, selfish, sinful self. I should be the publican in the back of the church crying out, Lord, help me, a sinner. Or the person using the jaws of life to extract the redwood from my own eye before commenting on the speck in my neighbor's. Power may be the ultimate aphrodisiac, as Henry Kissinger once famously proclaimed, and in uncertain times it is the weapon to which we most readily resort. But love is the ultimate expression of who we were created to be. This is neither a Minnesota nice kind of love that smiles and nods but never says what needs to be said, nor a take no prisoners kind of love where the message, no matter how valid or urgent, is undermined by the tactless or dismissive way in which it is delivered. It requires strength, maturity, self-possession, kindness, and a willingness to give others the same grace we crave for ourselves. I, for one, have a long way to go in simply understanding it, to say nothing of living it, but it's worth the effort, both as a Christian and as a historian. Let's conclude with this image from the walls of our library, inscribed with a passage from Proverbs 16:16. How much better to get wisdom than gold, to choose understanding rather than silver. What will wisdom and understanding mean in higher education or in society in the future? What does it mean now? I don't know. But I can tell you this. There is not a day that goes by that I am not reminded of and grateful for the tremendous privilege I've been given to be a learner, a scholar, a teacher, an author, and a colleague alongside a truly inspiring group of people here at Concordia University. And, dinosaur though I am, I'll enjoy looking for an answer to this and to other questions until I am extinct. It's been a tremendous honor to become a part of this lecture series. I am grateful to the Trembath family and to the Poehler Committee, and I am inexpressibly thankful for your kindness in being here tonight. Thank you very much. Let the Inquisition begin. I understand there's time for questions, so I'd be happy as best I can. Although, as you might guess, my answer to all your questions may be, I don't know. But if anyone has any, I'd be happy to give it a go. All right, then. Oh. Well, my wife's right there. I'm sure you could give them to her.
We have love.
I wrote a speech so bad that no one has a question. Such is life. All right. Oh.
Going? I had a student who did an assignment recently, and they interviewed a middle school person, and they were amazed at the conversation. And one of our alumni, fellow faculty, Bob Kolb, talks about education as conversation. And the thing that really impressed the student was this 13 or 14-year-old said, "Nobody's talked to me seriously like that before."
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if that's a question as much as an endorsement of what you're saying, Paul.
Well, thank you. I see a hand up. Oh, and David? David, you stood boldly. Go right ahead. The microphone is winging its way to you.
Yes, hello. So as students leave the safe shelter of education in the place where we're challenged to ask questions and to dig and to learn, how might you encourage students to continue that endeavor outside of college?
Oh,
And
wow.
Yeah.
Well, if we do it right, and of course that's a partnership, right, between faculty, staff, administrators, and students. If we do it right, what we're hoping to do is to train you to do exactly that, to be an ongoing, lifelong learner. In a perfect world, that's how it works. But let's face it, there are a lot of extra pressures. I mean, let's face it, I went to school at a time when I had the luxury of just being a student. That seems inconceivable to most students today, that they don't have to work, that they could live on campus and just be a student, be in the moment all the time. And so the first challenge we have is trying to help students as best we can in their lives where they are. And then upon graduation, I think the first thing I'd say is please remember, we're still here. Just because you graduate, and by the way, distinguished graduate, David Edwards, right here, winner of the Bartling Scholarship, and now at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. But I think nothing thrills a professor more than keeping in touch with students, with hearing how they're doing, talking through questions they have, not that we have all the answers. I think if tonight's lecture says anything, it's that I don't know where we're going. I just hope that we think carefully about where we're going and how we're doing it, and I'm glad that we have leaders who think that way. But I'm not really answering your question very well, am I, David? I just think, in general, what we're hoping to do is to encourage you to take that responsibility. There's that sentence they say before they hand out all the diplomas, right? With all the rights and privileges appertaining thereto, right? And what is one of those responsibilities? It's to continue to be a thinker, a learner, a leader, someone who encourages the provocative conversation, someone who isn't complacent in simply accepting something and receiving it whole, but instead thinks critically, takes it apart, thinks about alternative perspectives, and as a result is a good servant to one's church, to one's community, to the citizens of the country and of the world. I think the world needs more critical thinkers. And I think that's a large part of what higher education has to offer. It's not the only thing. And I by no means wish to minimize the importance of career preparation. It costs a lot of money to go to school. And so by all means, we want to do the best we can for our students and to provide them with opportunities not only for the workplace, but for what happens outside of the workplace. Life is what happens while you're at work, I'll put it that way, right? There are all of these other things. And in fact, one of the most meaningful conversations I had was with a friend of mine, Mel Shelby, who's a retired doctor, OBGYN surgeon. And he said, Paul, I received a really outstanding education. Part of it was training for my profession, but it was all the other stuff that made me me. And when we do it right, when we provide opportunity for conversation, for thought, for ongoing thinking about a wide variety of things, in addition to preparing you for a job, I think that's when we get it right and we get it best. Thank you. Jade.
You might have already kind of answered this, but my question is, how, as a society, do you think we can transition away, or what steps do we need to take to stop viewing education as a product? And
Well, as I said before, if I had the answer to that, I'd be a very wealthy man. I wouldn't be here tonight talking to you. But I just think, as I look at places like Concordia and I see what we value is deep thought in as wide a variety of areas as possible. When you look at our mission statement, when you look at our promise statement, we're proud to be where we are in a dynamic multicultural neighborhood. We're proud to be one of the most diverse campuses in the Twin Cities. And these are powerful assets that are right here at our fingertips. And so to me, part of it is as much a responsibility of the students as it is anyone who works at Concordia, and that is to be invested in a dynamic, ongoing conversation in which the stakes are higher than just, will I have a job when I graduate, but what kind of person will I be? And to me, I have to say, my experience at Concordia was very much about establishing myself as an independent thinker, establishing someone who saw his parents not as parents, but as people, as someone who worked through some of the thorny spiritual and ethical and intellectual issues that troubled me when I was younger. And again, these things are of value not just here and not just sort of in an esoteric way out in the great wide world. They are also valuable in the workplace. Employers do actually value these things. But I think as a society we could do a much better job of turning off those things that don't help us. And let's face it, there are plenty of those things out there. And trying to very intentionally, not in a way that encourages censorship, but just in a way that encourages good sense, that encourages the desire to be uplifted. I think those are the kinds of things that I would point to, I guess. But again, that's just a tiny bit of the answer, and the answer in its entirety is much more complex and much better stated than that. But thanks for the question. Tori.
Out of curiosity, if you were asked to be on a board for educational reform, what would be the number one thing you would want to change?
Oh, my goodness. I'd have to think about that. But I think it gets to the heart of what I've been talking about this evening, which is that we have to think not just about the short term. And by the way, the government is putting a lot of pressure on institutions of higher learning to think this way, where we're going to evaluate the success of an institution of higher learning based on the first job a graduate gets after leaving an institution. Now, if they did that with me, that would not be pretty. And again, that is remarkably short-sighted, short-term thinking. I think what it ought to be about is what are the skills and attitudes and intellectual assets that are being created and sustained within students who graduate from an institution. And those will have value both in the workplace and outside of the workplace. There was a very interesting book that came out, and I'm not going to remember the author, unfortunately, but it was written by a feminist who nonetheless said that equality has actually made for a less equal world. Now that sounds a little strange, but what she was saying was, now that we're in a society where women and men are investing the same amount of time, roughly, in housework, in child rearing, and in working, this is good for the family, but where is all that extra time coming from? And the answer is from being a volunteer, from being an active member of a church, from thinking critically about social issues, from caring about the poor, from all of these things that are vital, but that are falling by the wayside because we are becoming much more inward-oriented than probably ever before. That, to me, is one of the ironic things about this digital age in which we live. We are more connected than ever before, and yet much more isolated from one another than ever before. Maybe that's my own subjective understanding, but that to me is one of the ironies of the time in which we live. Oh, yes.
If silence is a problem in the churches, what can we do as individuals, and what can this university do as a place where Christ is honored to get conversations going?
Wonderful question. And again, do I have a nice, neat, packaged answer? No. Historians are much better at asking questions than they are at giving answers. But to me, one of the things that we have to work at both as a society and as a church is comfort with uncertainty, comfort with paradox and mystery and contradiction. And this to me is one of the great assets of being a historian, is that we are very tentative in our conclusions. We're sort of like snails in a way. We can work on a single topic for our entire lifetime if we want. So we're not like a member of a jury. We're not like a member of the press. We're not like someone working under a deadline. We think very carefully and very comprehensively about things, at least when we do our jobs well. And what I love about being at Concordia is that what we try to do, and it's a very difficult thing to do, is to say it's all there. We want to be open to discussions of all kinds, and that's a very difficult ideal to uphold because ultimately almost nobody is happy with that. Because again, everybody wants power, everyone wants to privilege their particular point of view, but at a university, it's supposed to be about sharing ideas and being comfortable with disagreement. And so to me, that's at least a start to that particular situation, is to say, I have to have as much respect for someone who disagrees with me in every way as I do with someone that I go out and have a beer with every week who agrees with everything I say. I mean, we all want comfort. We all, to some degree, want a group of people who are like us. But to me, again, the university, certainly this American society that's been established on freedom, democracy, free speech, it has to be about letting people say what they want to say. And that's a very important part of what we do. Well, that's probably about enough. Oops.
Oh, if we're done, we're done. I have one last question.
You have a
if it's
microphone
okay.
in your
Thank
hand.
you, Paul. Thank you, and I'm so honored to be your colleague sitting here tonight.
Right back at
really,
you.
really honored. So I know this isn't the main topic of your talk tonight, but if I were to listen carefully to the context, subtext, and pretext of what you said, I think you alluded to this a little bit, and I can guess how this has informed your comments. But I'd love to just hear you comment on how your extensive work with the Hmong community over all these years has informed your current position on education.
Oh, wow.
I mean, just a comment or two.
That
That's a
could be
whole nother talk.
I was going to say, that could be the other speech that should have been written instead of this one, I suppose. I have to say, it's been a tremendous privilege. First of all, to be led into that direction by my relationship with my students. It was not a research topic for me. And in fact, it was very much a situation in which I thought, I don't have the expertise in the subject area, but I can show these kids how to do oral history, and therefore they can go and talk to mom and to grandma and to the elders and their family and learn about who they are. Because let's face it, who our parents are shapes very much who we are, whether we know it or not. There are things that happen to them we're not even aware of, and yet they've still shaped us in a very profound way. And I think, to me, that's an important part of studying history as well, is that there are so many things that we are unaware of. And I think that's true for education as well. Those of you who have graduate degrees know that, the old saying is true: the more you know, the more you realize what you don't know. And more knowledge or more alleged expertise is really just a way of saying, oh my goodness, What I've done is simply unleashed a whole new set of questions that are going to lead me down a lifelong journey in which I hope, in some level, to try to even understand the questions, to say nothing of the answers. And I think that sense of scope, that sense of context, that sense, if you will, of humility, that says, I don't have all the answers. In fact, I probably have none of the answers. But I'm willing to explore what good questions are so that I can learn more. That to me, was part of the tremendous gift of working with the Hmong community and having my students provide not just such undeserved trust in me to help them go about this project, but then to open doors for me to learn and to get to know more and more people and to really dig deeply in this particular subject. So thanks for the question. It's one of the highlights of my career, to be sure. And with that, let us call it an evening, shall we? Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you.
Oh, boy, that was great. That's great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and what a nice crowd.
Yes.
It was really just terrific. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tom Reese, president here at Concordia University. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you to this very special evening. And I must say, Paul, that there were two words of your speech that I didn't like tonight.
Okay.
And those two words were, let's conclude, because I could have listened to you for a lot longer.
You were very kind.
It was really, really very special.
Thank you.
And the depth of understanding of complex issues and the passion you have for students are evident in everything you said tonight, but more evident in those of us who walk the halls with you every day. So thank you very much for the work that you put into this presentation and for sharing it in the way that you did. We have a plaque to give you, and then I have just a few other quick announcements I'd like to make. But first of all, this is presented to Dr. Paul Hillmer, Poehler Lecture Series, Connecting Faith and Learning, in gratitude for your presentation on March 3, 2015, Concordia University, St. Paul. Apply your mind to my teaching so that your trust may be in the Lord. Proverbs 22:17 and 19. So we thank you again, and we present this for the wall in your massive office, patient's office. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. There are a number of things I'd like to share, and then we'll dismiss for the evening. But first of all, we are proud and honored and privileged to have two members of the Poehler family with us again this evening. Two folks who have been very active in coming to campus over the years and are with us again, Teddy Keppen and Robbie Trembath. I guess you go by Robbie, is that right? Or does just your aunts call you that? But anyway, in some circles, I'm Tommy Reese, so I kind of like that, that there are people who know me that way. So thank you so much, Teddy and Rob. Could you stand so that we could thank you for coming and being with us and being part of this program tonight? Also, another very special person who is here this evening is our new Vice President for Academic Affairs. Not unknown to many of you, but soon to return to our campus in the middle part of June. At least that's what the plan is right now. Dr. Marilyn Reinick is here with us, and I'd like to have her stand so that we can thank you, Marilyn, for accepting our call and for being here tonight. And also with Marilyn is her husband, Bob. Bob, it's good to see you, and nice to have you here as well. The third thing I'd like to share is I have been always so impressed, but in my role as president now these last 4 years, so impressed with the depth of scholarship that comes out of not only our faculty, but also our staff. They are recognized for their scholarship in many ways. I have a cabinet in my office that I put books in that regularly faculty and sometimes staff have authored, and different works and artifacts that remind me of the special place the special place of scholarship amongst our faculty and the special number of accomplishments, and that cabinet is getting filled up quickly. I'm proud to announce tonight that the latest edition of that kind of scholarship, in a book that was edited and was the brainchild of Dr. Bruce Corey, called Leading with the Spirit, has just been published. It's hot off the press. In fact, I can hardly hold it in my hand, it's so warm. And features articles of a practical nature based on the best of scholarship in various fields from over 24 members of our faculty and our staff, and even some friends of ours in the community. So Leading with the Spirit. Bruce, we're going to have a presentation night. When is it, the 19th of March? Something coming up? You'll hear about it. It'll be in all the papers. And so we're really, I'm delighted to announce this new book, and thankful to Bruce for a vision that really took him about 4 years to make it happen. Congratulations, Bruce, on this new publication. Thank you. Very good. So we have now a lot of inspiration from Dr. Hillmer, a lot of powerful words and concepts, but especially this great theme to love one another as Christ has loved us. And I thank you, Paul, for sharing that with us. And so I say this evening, go in peace and serve the Lord. God bless you.